What you are seeing in front of you today is not just a passing scene, but the remnants of an entire city, Gaza City, which has become rubble after the Israeli army actually began its invasion with tanks and armored vehicles. This invasion did not come suddenly, but was preceded by continuous waves of concentrated aerial bombardment on residential towers. The goal was clear and explicit: to force civilians to flee from the northern part of the strip toward the south. This created a tragic scene of thousands of Palestinian families who had been living in northern Gaza being forced to leave their homes and neighborhoods, fleeing under relentless bombardment. The direct result of this was the displacement of more than 300,000 Palestinians, who were forced to leave Gaza City and head south toward Rafah. The Israeli army assigned 3 main military divisions for this operation: Division 18, Division 162, and with them Division 36, which at first did not actually enter the city, but the plan was for them to continue the incursion after completing the phase of preparatory fire and displacing as many residents as possible. The idea is simply that the army is trying to empty the city of its residents before beginning a wide-scale ground incursion. But to understand more, we must know that each of these divisions has a specific military role. Division 18, for example, is the Special Commando Forces, the spearhead of any offensive operation. They are the ones who descend to directly clash with Hamas fighters in the alleys and streets of the city. Division 162, on the other hand, is an armored mechanized force whose mission is to control vital sites and establish strong defensive lines. Finally, Division 36 plans to carry out a comprehensive encirclement of the city, preventing any supplies from reaching the fighters or reinforcing their resilience. In this way, Little Gaza becomes besieged from all directions: aircraft above, tanks on the ground, ships from the Mediterranean, and special forces face to face. The entire scene is summed up in one sentence: Israel is striking Gaza from sea, land, and air simultaneously. The declared objectives were 2. First, the assassination of a specific figure, Ezzedine Al-Haddad, and second, the displacement of as many residents of the city as possible toward the south. For them, the displacement plan is not a passing detail, but the foundation of the operation. And that was what Netanyahu insisted on. It must continue. It must continue. From Netanyahu's perspective, displacing the population from Gaza to the south is a vital step that must be achieved at any cost. After the continuous bombardment and the beginning of the invasion, the remaining population of Gaza City was no more than 800,000 Palestinians. These numbers indicate that continued bombardment at the same intensity could almost completely empty the city. The military operation itself was allocated more than $7 billion, with an initial time frame of about 6 months. At first, Netanyahu wanted to finish quickly within a month or two, but after disputes with the Israeli Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi, they agreed the operation would take longer, possibly until the beginning of the new year, or a full 6 months. The main reason was that the Chief of Staff was implementing a plan he called controlling the pace of maneuver. It simply meant a slow, gradual advance with intensified firepower to protect the soldiers. The priority was not the speed of ending the war, but reducing army losses. Halevi was saying openly, "I am not in a hurry." The plan relied on advancing step by step inside Gaza's streets, while destroying any remnants of the city's battalions led by Ezzedine Al-Haddad. The ultimate goal was to control vital sites after the complete displacement of residents. Notably, the army mentioned Al-Haddad by name in its plans, which means the operation was not only against Hamas as a whole, but against a specific commander they considered the greatest threat. And here the question arises: who is Ezzedine Al-Haddad, against whom Israel is mobilizing all its power? He is the actual leader of Hamas in Gaza, after the absence or death of top leaders like Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Sinwar, and Mohammed Daif. Israel sees him as the most dangerous man in Gaza today because he is the last heavyweight commander left in the field, making his targeting a top priority. The reason is that Ezzedine Al-Haddad is not just a prominent military leader, but, according to Israeli army estimates, he is the one refusing to hand over the Israeli hostages being held. Thus, in their eyes, he has become the main obstacle to any settlement. The army says he was the one who ordered his fighters in Al-Aqsa flood to capture as many settlers as possible and take them into the tunnels. The relationship between Al-Haddad and Israel is complex and vengeful. The man lost his son, Suhaib, in an Israeli airstrike in 2022 in the Al-Tufa neighborhood east of Gaza. That strike was one of more than 6 assassination attempts that targeted him from 2009 until today. With each failure to kill him, he became an even more valuable target, to the extent that they announced a reward of up to $750,000 for any information leading to his location. The Israeli army sees Ezzedine Al-Haddad not just as a commander, but as a symbol of resistance. He was the one who distributed the decision to declare war on October 7th to brigade and battalion commanders, and he is insistent that the battle continue until victory or martyrdom. This has given the battle a greater moral dimension. Al-Haddad is not alone. Around 2,500 of Hamas's elite fighters stand with him. True, the number is small compared to a full army, but their danger lies in the fact that they are fighting on their own land, in the streets of their own city. They have long experience in urban warfare, and this is what made the Israeli Chief of Staff insist on the plan of gradual incursion instead of a direct assault. Because any rapid confrontation with 2,500 trained fighters in the heart of the city could cost the army heavy losses. The Israeli plan is built on besieging Al-Haddad's forces and exhausting their weapons and supplies until they are forced to surface and fight or die underground from hunger. But the bigger problem is not between the army and Al-Haddad's fighters. The real problem is the civilians. They are the ones paying the direct price, their homes collapsing over their heads, facing hunger and thirst, with no safety and no escape. In war, civilians are always the weakest link. The dilemma is also that Al-Haddad's conditions for ending the war are rejected by Israel, while Israel's conditions are rejected by Al-Haddad. Israel demands the release of hostages and the disarmament of Hamas. In return, Al-Haddad has 5 conditions: the complete withdrawal of the army, the end of the war, the release of Palestinian prisoners, reconstruction, and allowing goods to enter the strip at pre-war levels. Al-Haddad was clear on the last point. He wants goods to return normally, not just humanitarian aid. Goods mean trade movement that meets people's needs and gives his fighters the means to continue. But, as is obvious, both sides cling to their positions, and the result is the continuation of war and the bleeding of civilians. What is more dangerous is that Al-Haddad's holding onto the hostages gives Israel a justification to continue the invasion, while at the same time driving it to escalate displacement southward. In other words, each side exploits the crisis to cement its position, and here Egypt's role in the regional scene emerges. Relations between Egypt and Israel have reached unprecedented tension. Even Israel's own Walla news site published reports that Egypt has reduced its security coordination with the Israeli army. Israeli media summed it up in one sentence: the Israeli army calls Egypt and Egypt does not answer. The most dangerous point highlighted by the Israeli press was the Egyptian president's statements at the Arab summit in Doha. In his speech, he clearly said he was ready to form a unified Arab military alliance, what was called the Unified Arab Army. This is a very sensitive issue for Israel because it touches the core of the Camp David agreement, which was built on the idea that the two sides are friends, not enemies. Israeli media ignored the rest of the summit details and focused only on that point. For them, if Egypt is truly considering a unified Arab military alliance against Israel, then the future of Camp David itself is at stake. Israeli correspondents began analyzing his words, line by line. For example, a Channel 14 correspondent pointed to a statement by Egypt's foreign minister who said that Egypt demands the establishment of a Palestinian state on the entirety of Palestinian national territory. In their view, this was a serious escalation. They were used to hearing calls for a state on the 1,967 borders, but here the demand included the whole of Palestinian land. The message was clear: Israel would have no place. The Israeli opposition seized the opportunity. Yair Lapid, the opposition leader, attacked Netanyahu and accused him of leading to the burning of the Camp David agreement. He told him explicitly, stay out of Egypt and the Egyptians. Even General Yair Golan, head of the Democrats' party, criticized him and warned that his actions could destroy relations with Egypt and Jordan and cause the Abraham Accords to collapse. The issue was clear. Netanyahu's policy was causing Israel's diplomatic isolation. For example, the UAE, which was at the forefront of the normalizing countries, refused to host him officially. Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed told him directly, you will not enter the UAE until you stop the ceasefire and end the war in Gaza. That position was a shock. The internal scene in Israel was not calmer. An investigative journalist on Jewish Voice Radio warned the Israeli people that what happened on October 7 in Al-Aqsa flood would be nothing compared to what might happen if Egypt entered the confrontation. He described it as the Egyptian flood that could turn the entire equation upside down. The Knesset itself hosted Ruth Wasserman from the Misgav Institute for Zionist National Security to assess the situation. Her response was direct. If Netanyahu continues his policies with Egypt, it might go to war. She added that the government must show humility and review itself before dragging Egypt into a military action it cannot withstand. The scene heated up further when General Erez Weiner, the former aide to the Israeli army chief, wrote a tweet saying the Egyptians are arming themselves, and confirmed that the amounts of weapons moved into Sinai were far greater than what the Egyptian army would need for any ordinary war. The message was clear: Egypt is preparing seriously. But let's return to Gaza itself. The Israeli army announced that it had destroyed 3,600 houses and residential towers and also struck 13,000 tents of displaced people. The idea is that when you destroy the tents of the displaced, you force them to continue moving south because they no longer have anywhere to stay. The goal: gradual displacement. The strange thing is that about 800,000 Palestinians who are still clinging to staying in Gaza are moving from one neighborhood to another inside the city. For example, if the east is bombed, they go west. If the west is bombed, they go north, and so on. But why don't they move south? Because they know the south is not safe, it is being bombed, and it is empty of food, water, and medicine. Palestinians say, if I'm going to die from bombing here, then it's better to die in my own home than to die from hunger and thirst there. Some families try to move south, hoping the war would suddenly end or that international intervention would save what is left of Gaza. But hope is weak and all options are painful. And amid all this, a paradox appeared: Netanyahu is fighting alone. How? Israel's top military and security leaders, from Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi to the head of Mossad and the head of Shin Bet, were opposed to the idea of invading Gaza from the very beginning. Their opposition was not out of sympathy for Palestinians, but based on 4 reasons: that the operation could kill the hostages instead of rescuing them, that it would cost the army hundreds of dead in exchange for freeing only 20 hostages, that the total elimination of Hamas is impossible, and even if it were achieved, it would require imposing military rule over more than 2 million Palestinians. Despite all these objections, Netanyahu ignored them and pressed on with his plan. He announced that, after 2 weeks, he would travel to the United States to give a speech at the United Nations and meet US President Trump. The irony is that Netanyahu is wanted by the International Criminal Court, yet he would stand on the UN podium. This issue sparked European anger. Some countries called for suspending the free trade agreement with Israel, but countries like Germany, Hungary, and the Czech Republic refused. In contrast, countries like Ireland, Spain, Sweden, and the Netherlands were the ones calling for sanctions. Even European stances that seemed strong from afar turned out to be empty words up close. For example, the Dutch foreign minister announced a ban on importing Israeli goods but exempted settlement products only, which in reality produce almost nothing, so the decision was just a political message, not a real punishment. The same with Canada. The foreign minister said they were studying a re-evaluation of relations with Israel. The word studying simply meant no real steps. The conclusion was that the war in Gaza had reached a decisive stage, either absolute victory for Israel or withdrawal after exhaustion. But it is important to know that Israel is not the only one suffering. Hamas itself is in its worst condition. Nearly all first and second tier leaders have been killed. Thousands of fighters have been worn down. There are severe shortages of ammunition and supplies, and growing popular pressure from Palestinians who are exhausted from displacement, hunger, and sleeping in the streets. Israel has also expanded its targeting of Hamas leaders outside Gaza, even in Doha. Nowhere is safe anymore. Gaza itself has become the last refuge for Ezzedine Al-Haddad and his fighters, besieged and struck from every direction. Israel says it is not in a hurry and can continue for 6 months until Gaza falls. Meanwhile, there is no effective international deterrent. Qatar rejected the idea of a joint Arab army and renewed a defense agreement with the United States in exchange for massive arms deals. The Emir of Qatar was clear, "We are committed to American protection." And here, the question arises, could Egypt actually enter the war? And would Arab countries agree to the proposal of a unified Arab army, or would each country say, "Every man for himself"?